Hello and welcome to the first technical talk on Ram's Eye the Track Guy. Today we'll be talking about trail braking. Trail braking is a relatively advanced driving technique where you carry some of the braking in corner entry as opposed to doing it all in the braking zone. If you've just started doing high performance driving school, or if you've been doing it for a while, chances are you were taught to get all your braking done in a straight line. Two very good reasons for that. Number one is safety. When you're just starting, it's typically a lot that you have to figure out. You have to know where you're supposed to be on track, where your braking point is, where your turn-in point is, where you're supposed to be in the corner, how to smoothly transition from braking to turn in to getting back on the power or maintenance throttle, and how to get your foot back on the power to start accelerating out of your apex. So to get all that done is typically a lot of work. If you throw in something extra that someone has to learn, or trail braking, then you're just asking a little bit too much. Most new students are overwhelmed with the basics, and if you have a manual car, you also have to learn how to heel and toe downshift, and there's just so much to ask. And the problem is you're doing all of that while you're also eliminating some of the margin of error that's already built into the corner, because instead of getting all your braking done in the braking zone, you're pushing your braking later, which means you're on the power longer. You're also carrying a little bit more speed into the corner, and all of a sudden some of the margin of error that you would have is gone, and the risk of an incident is increased by quite a bit. And that's the last thing someone wants, whether you're organizing or you're out there having fun. It's just the last thing someone wants on track is an incident. So it's typically best left. And the second reason kind of builds on that, which is if you're asking someone to learn all these techniques all at the beginning, you're going to slow down how quickly they pick up the basics, like the line that they're supposed to be on, and the smooth transition from one to the other. So it's always best to keep it to the end. But if you started mastering the basics and you're starting to look for ways that you can drive better, trail braking can actually help quite a bit. There are a couple of ways that trail braking can help. Number one, it helps you maximize use of available grip that you have of the tires. I'm going to talk about tires in a little bit more detail in a future video, but what's important to know now is that tires have something called a grip budget. It's a concept that most of you are probably already familiar with, but what it means is that you have a maximum amount of grip that you can use at the tire, and you have to split between everything you're asking the tire to do. So you can't do maximum braking and maximum turn-in at the same time. You can only do one or the other, or you can blend partial braking and partial turn-in. And why is that important? The reason why it's important is that if you take a look at some trend logs of what the car is doing as it's approaching a turn-in, if you get all your braking done in a straight line and you look at the G-forces in all directions, there's usually maximum deceleration at the beginning of the braking zone, and then as you approach the turn-in, naturally the rate of deceleration slows down as the speed comes down. So you don't actually need maximum braking for the entire length of the braking zone up until you start turning. So what you're doing is that instead of starting here, you push it later in and you start there. And what that happens is that you use the maximum braking still in a straight line, but once you start turning, you're blending some of the turn-in and some of the braking, because you don't need maximum braking and maximum turn-in as you're initiating the turn-in. And the same thing happens with turn-in, but in opposite direction. As you initiate the turn-in, you don't need maximum lateral grip. You start to build lateral forces because there's some delay between when you initiate the turn in and then the suspension to react to that, and then you wait to transfer and the tire to deform. By the time you get all of that done, there's some time delay, and in that period of time, if you do all your braking prior to turn in, you're wasting some of the available grip of the tire. So what trail braking does is that it lets you do your maximum braking in a short period of time where you need it in a straight line, and then you start to turn in and you blend. You do partial braking, partial turn in, so you're maximizing use of the available grip of the tires. And then as you're getting towards maximum turn in that you need, you start to lift your foot smoothly off the brakes, and then you start to get back on the power to maintain your speed through the corner until you get to the apex where you start to build power again. Now, the second way trail braking can help is that it helps you maintain some of the weight transfer that happens under braking over the front axle as you go through corner entry. What that means is that there's more grip in the front. So as you probably know or have noticed, whenever you get on the brakes, there's some weight transfer that happens from the rear axle to the front axle because the car weight shifts forward and leans on the front axle. But It's typically pronounced by body movement, but even the most stiffly sprung race cars, or even cars that don't have any suspension like go-karts, they still experience weight transfer. And what that means is that there's more grip on the front than there is in the rear when you're on the brakes. As you start to turn in, if you're completely off the brakes, as you would be if you were getting all your braking done in a straight line, you take away all that weight that you've put on the front tires and put it back to the rears, and you actually start to rob a little bit of the brakes. You start to rob a little bit of that grip and give it back to the rear tires. Because as you get back on maintenance throttle, the car starts to shift some weight back on the rear axle. And that's why 911s, for instance, they understeer a lot on power, because they already are very, very rear biased. So as you start to get back on the power, the front lifts even more, and there's very little on the front axle, very little weight on the front axle, and therefore very little grip. The opposite is what you're trying to do with trail braking. You're trying to maintain some of the weight transfer on the front axle as you go through the turn. And how that helps you is that it helps you put more grip in the front and less grip in the rear. It's almost like putting a stiffer rear bar that helps you maintain some weight transfer over the front axle to get more grip up front. The only difference is that it's only transitional, obviously. As you lift off the brakes, that weight goes back to the rear axle. But you can use that to your advantage, because the car all of a sudden now is more willing to turn in, or it's willing to turn at the same line but carry more speed in the turn in. I'm going to show you the results that you can get with trail braking using some telemetry and a couple of videos of me going through the same corner in the same car on the same day at our track at Atlantic Motorsport Park. The first video, I'm going to go through the corner without trail braking. Now you might be able to see on the G meter a little bit of turning and braking at the same time. It's only because the entry of the corner has a very slight bend in it, but after that it's straight line braking and then just turning. And then the second video, I'm going to show you going through the exact same corner with trail braking. Now here you can see braking is mostly in a straight line. It's not maximum braking because I wasn't going flat out before the turn, because I was trying to pay a little bit of attention to the speed so that I can go through the corner with turn in without trail braking at the same speed, so it can be an apples to apples comparison. So in this case you can see there's braking in mostly a straight line. The amount of g-forces in deceleration is almost all in one line. There's no turn in, and by the time I get to the corner, I want you to pay attention to what's happening as that red dot that's showing the g-forces moves down in a straight line towards the center, and then it starts moving to the left as we're going through the corner, and it's happening at the same speed while maintaining about 48 miles an hour. Now you can see here just past the apex, I'm going still about 49 miles an hour, but the car is running wide. You can see that by looking on the bottom right corner of the video. You can see how far I am from the apex. It looks fairly close, but obviously the wheel itself is quite a bit away from the apex. And you can see the throttle, there's very little throttle at this point. I can't put any more throttle because the car will run wide, and all I can do is just maintain that amount, maintain the turn in and the steering lock, and just wait for a corner exit. I can't do any more because right now the car is running wide. Now here it is with trail braking. You can see that maximum braking is near the top of the G meter, and I'm going through the corner. I'm trying to get the exact same speed that I did in without trail braking, so that it's an apples to apples comparison. And I want you to watch the G meter and see how it moves as opposed to moving down and then to the left. It kind of follows the limit of the friction circle or the G meter on the left as it moves from maximum braking to partial braking and partial turn in as I aim for the apex. So you can see here I'm much closer to the apex in the middle of the corner compared to without trail braking, and despite that I'm actually applying more throttle and picked up more speed. So despite going into the corner with the same speed in both scenarios, both at about 48 miles an hour indicated, I was able to get back on the power earlier and picked up about 6 miles an hour without running wide. When I didn't trail brake, I couldn't get into the power as you saw, with only about 49 miles an hour indicated mid-corner, but the car was already running wide and missed the apex by a few feet. And the main reason why is that the turn-in was much better. So I'm applying about the same steering lock, I went in the corner at about the same speed, but without trail braking the car runs wide because there's not enough grip up front. Whereas with trail braking, the car can turn in much better and I can get back on the power earlier. Now, if you're taking best advantage of trail braking, you would obviously be going through the corner at a higher speed in entry, and you'd also be getting back on the power better without the car running wide. But I wanted to keep it as apples to apples as possible, so I enter the corner at the same speed with both of them. And with 48 miles an hour without trail braking, the car runs wide, whereas with trail braking, the car is online and I can actually get back on the power earlier and start building speed. Now, the biggest question to ask is, should you start trail braking if you aren't already? And the answer to that really usually depends on how you're driving and what car you're driving. My best suggestion would be to try to find an instructor to go out with you and see what they say. He or she should be able to tell you if you're ready to start trail braking. Generally speaking, you should only start trail braking once you've got the basics down. So if you can smoothly go on the brakes, smoothly transition from off the brakes to turn in, smoothly transition back on the power, then you're probably ready to start. If you're in a manual car, I would say heel and toe downshifting is better to get up front than trail braking, because a bad or a botched heel and toe downshift could easily upset the car if you're on the throttle too much or if you're not enough, and you can kind of shock the rear axle, even the front. If you have all the basics right, I would say try to find an instructor and ask them if they can help you figure out how to trail brake and whether or not you're ready. It's much better to have feedback from someone in the passenger seat, because oftentimes if you're driving, your perception of abrupt inputs is less than someone in the passenger seat, because you're holding on to the steering wheel, you're giving the inputs, so you're expecting some reaction from the car. But someone in the passenger seat is not doing any of the inputs, is not holding on to much, and they can be able to tell much more easily if your inputs are abrupt or not. So I would say find an instructor, go out in a school and get someone to help you with trail braking. For the vast majority of cars, trail braking can help you go faster. In some instances, it actually helps you save some money, and instead of throwing thousands of dollars of suspension setups trying to get the car to be perfectly balanced. Because from what I've seen, a lot of people, they're very happy with how the car goes through mid-corner. They're very happy with how the car reacts under power and corner exit. They just don't like how much understeer is in turn-in. If you can get the trail braking done in turn-in and get the car actually turned to go through the turn, then it can save you quite a bit of money, and it can help you focus on something else. Or if you have already spent a lot of money on a good suspension setup and you're kind of struggling between how to set up the car, you're happy in, say, mid-corner to the exit, but you're not happy in the turn-in. You can maintain the car balanced towards where it's happy in the second half of the corner, and then start trail braking to get the car turned in the corner entry, and then you have the best of both worlds, basically. If you've liked this video, please make sure to subscribe. I have a lot more coming that I think you're going to enjoy. There's some reviews and more technical talks, some features and some coaching. I think you're going to like everything. And until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.